recording, so here we go. All right, so we're ready to get started. I'm here for a second talk with Joshua Spodek. We met last time and we talked a little bit about your thoughts on many different things, including the values of our society and the ones that lead us into the position that we're in right now. So Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And yeah, I'm glad you said values. I think values and goals, these are the things that really, I don't think many people identify that as what's driving everything here. It's not carbon dioxide, it's not mercury, it's not methane. Those are the results of our values. Mm-hmm. And It's so easy for people to look at the technology part and the science part and think, what does it have to do with our emotions? What does it have to do with what we care about? And what we care about and our emotions and our values, these drive the technology and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we tend to focus a lot on the technology and how, we just need to focus on this technology. And if we can get this technology working, then we're going to be in a great place to solve climate change and solve all the world's problems. But I think what you talked about last time is what we need in leadership is people going out and changing values, not just technology.
Yeah, I'll amplify that a bit to say what we need is leadership, because not just what we need in leadership. We need that in leadership, but we need leadership because people aren't changing their behavior. Also about technology, the way I look at technology is it's a tool that amplifies the intent of the person creating and using it. Mm-hmm. If the person intends to grow, technology will have you grow faster. If your intent is to become more efficient, technology will make you more efficient. If your goal is to become more resilient, you will find technology to make you more resilient. So if we don't change our goals and values, the technology just accelerates where we're going.
Right. So when we ended last time, you were talking about Norman Borlaug, and you had talked about how you wanted to start with him this time.
Yeah, he is one of the towering figures in history. And a lot of people describe him as like the most important person most people haven't heard of. And I'm going to start with a couple of different people first.
Okay.
There's a view that I'd like to start with that I didn't mention last time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with Dave Chappelle. And I hope people know who he is because he's a really funny comedian. He's like one of the funniest comedians I know. I really like his stuff.
Yeah, I love him.
There's an episode of him on Inside the Actors Studio. For people who haven't watched Inside the Actors Studio, the audience members in the studio audience are elite actors. And the guests on Inside the Actors Studio are the great Hollywood people of all time, mm-hmm. Pacino, De Niro, Streep, people like that. Mm-hmm. So Chappelle is one of the guests, and Dave Lipton, the host, is asking him a bunch of stuff. And so he's talking about when he was in high school, graduating high school, and he says to his father in a really cocky way of how he's going to succeed in stand-up comedy. Mm-hmm. Stand-up comedy is not a place where you're guaranteed success.
Sure.
So to be cocky about succeeding, it's bold. Mm-hmm. His father says, son, if you say it that way, if you really believe that, I think you should go for it. I think you should give it a shot. Mm-hmm. But it can get crazy in Hollywood. And before you go into that craziness, name your price. Identify what is too much for you to pay for success in Hollywood. And if it ever gets to be too expensive, walk away. And Dave Chappelle pauses and looks at the audience and he goes, hence Africa. Now, not everyone knows Dave Chappelle's history, but he had the Chappelle Show was super famous. He walked away from a $50 million contract and just went to Africa. No explanation. Maybe the people who really knew well knew. If you look here's one measure. If you look at his TV specials on YouTube, on Wikipedia, mm-hmm. there's a 10-year gap. So he went to Africa, he came back, but I don't really know what he did. We're not yet friends.
Sure.
I think from the outside, you'd say, "Whoa, that's a lot to walk away from. That's crazy," or something, But he knew. We don't know what came with the $50 million. It wasn't just like, "Here, have some free money."
Sure.
So it must have been some crazy stuff, mm-hmm. and he named his price ahead of time before he walked away. Mm-hmm. Anyone who knows, he just won the Mark Twain Award, so he's very successful. He is mm-hmm. His career has not suffered for this. In fact, if you listen to him talk about it, he stayed true to himself. And I'm going to give another example of Muhammad Ali. Mm-hmm. He was born Cassius Clay.
Mhm.
He went through a period of, am I going to convert and become Muhammad Ali? Not sure. This is the mid to late 60s.
Mhm.
He became Muhammad Ali, and shortly thereafter, in 1967, he was drafted by the U.S. Army to fight in Vietnam.
Mhm.
They weren't going to put him on the front lines. I mean, that would be a mistake. He would be doing something with the Army. And he had decided before the draft, before they call him in, they say, cross this line. And he didn't cross the line because he had decided beforehand that he was a conscientious objector and he would not do that. So he decided ahead of time, when he was calm, thinking about it thoughtfully, what lines he would not cross, and he would not cross that line. Even Jackie Robinson said, you should go. Of course, go. Because, now we think of Vietnam as this controversial thing, but at the time, he was the first major figure. At that time, he was the heavyweight champion of the world to not go and to oppose it. They stripped him of his boxing license, took away his passport, so he couldn't box in the country and he couldn't leave the country to box anywhere else. He almost went broke. He was a pariah. He couldn't practice at the prime of his physical prime, at the peak of his physical prime. And he got death threats. As we all know, we might not know that a couple of years later, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, overturned his conviction, and he could fight again and became. Before that, he was a heavyweight champion of the world. After that, I believe he became the greatest of all time, transcending sport. And I think every athlete speaking out today, and many non-athletes speaking out today, I think are following in his footsteps. And it's because he drew his line and he would not cross that line. And then he just rolled with the consequences. It was a difficult time.
Right.
But now, why do I talk about crossing lines and naming prices? I talk to a lot of people about the environment. And a lot of people say, Josh, people have to feel it themselves. They have to experience it before they act. But if they do experience it, they'll act. Or, a lot of people say that about themselves. So last fall of 2019, people would say that to me. In the spring of 2020, they would say that to me. And I would say, how about a global pandemic that has billions of people under lockdown? And they say, oh, yeah, well, aside from that, there'd have to be something else. We are not drawing our lines.
Right.
We are not naming our prices. We are we're moving the goalposts. When I talk to people about this stuff, a lot of times people find that the world has crossed their line a long time ago. I found that out. But before I could act, before I realized that there are things I could do, which we'll talk about next time, and before I acted myself and realized, what I'm doing can make a difference. It is making a difference. I thought, if I can't make a difference, then what point is there? I would cross lines and not act. So to everyone watching and listening, take some time to think for yourself, what is my line? What is my price that I will walk away from? And realize that there are people in the past who walked away from things, who didn't cross the line. And from the outside perspective, it looked like Dave Chappelle lost $50 million. Ali lost the ability to box. But if you watch them talking about these things, that's how they found themselves. That's how they transcended their art or their sport. Rosa Parks would not cross the line to the back of the bus. And of course, it wasn't just her. I hope people know that was a planned effort where she was just one person with the whole team deciding when and how that bus boycott would be started. But she would not cross that line. And she was a criminal. And I think most of us are glad that she did it.
Yeah.
So everyone, when you fall asleep tonight, ask yourself, what lines am I not willing, when the world crosses that line, or it asks me to cross that line, I will act. Because for me, the world's crossed the line, and I will not accept. I must do what I can to change the situation. And I may succeed, I may not succeed, but I'm giving everything I've gotten. And that is much more rewarding. That is a much more fulfilling life. That puts me much more in touch with my family, with my loved ones, with my community, with my nation, with my world, with the people far away that I will not get to see because I'm not flying to go see them. And so Dave Chappelle, Muhammad Ali, Rosa Parks, these are historical figures that named their prices, drew their lines, and we can learn from them. I hope I wasn't too repetitive there.
No,
but it's
not at
very,
all.
okay.
I hope that at some point in time we can add Joshua Spodek to that list as well.
Well, I've refused to cross a line, and I've acted. I've not yet reached Chappelle, Ali, Parks level of notoriety. And I hope someone listening passes me by like I'm standing still and does better.
Yeah.
It'll be more valuable for them than for me, but hopefully for the whole world. So Norman Borlaug.
Mm-hmm.
So people who don't know who Norman Borlaug is, do you know much about him?
I don't know that much about him, actually. You've mentioned him before, but I don't know a lot about him.
There's a wonderful American Experience documentary about him that I recommend. And there's plenty of stuff online. So he grew up in a farm
Mm-hmm.
and learned forestry and he learned some biology stuff. I forget his exact degrees. And he ended up in Mexico at some point, post-war, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
the 50s, maybe 60s.
Mm-hmm.
It was famine. And he helped figure out how to make more wheat grow in new ways. That led him to, then he went to India and had more grow there. And he was, more than anyone else, the father of the Green Revolution.
Okay.
Many credit him with saving billions of lives.
Mm-hmm.
He also, now people look at it slightly differently because that came at a huge increase in amounts of fertilizer, artificial pesticides, or just pesticides, and water use, as well as moving much more toward large farms versus
Mm-hmm.
community local farms, which led to a big shift in mega industrial farming.
Mm-hmm.
But people credit him with saving billions of lives. You might say he enabled billions of lives to be born that wouldn't have been born otherwise. So he enabled growth. He knew this. Most people don't get this, but that when he won the Nobel Prize for the Green Revolution, he very clearly said, there are two problems. There's hunger, and there's what he called the population monster. So he looked out and saw this, there's people starving right now. And if the population keeps growing, we'll get back to the same situation later. So we have to figure out how to keep the population from growing too much. So he tackled one of the two major problems, the starvation. And when you see people starving, it's impossible and you could do something about it. I mean, he did way more than most people. I mean, the amount of work that he did was really off the charts, mm-hmm. Both in terms of physical labor and time, as well as in terms of the mental applying himself. Uh-huh. So wonderful, wonderful man. But it's totally reasonable to think he's going to solve one problem. Someone else will solve the other problem. Mm-hmm. No one has stepped up to solve the other problem. And he said, in a couple of decades, we're going to be right back where we are now, just with a bigger population.
Right.
And I read that for the second half of his career, every speech he gave, he would mention the population monster, his term. Mm. If anyone knows the issues of feeding the top line, creating more resources, mm-hmm. and in this case, the energy came in the form of food, but it would be the same thing of just providing more fossil fuel energy or more solar energy, more wind energy. If mm-hmm. we just keep supplying what's missing, but we don't fix the population monster, and no one knows this better than he did. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, he knows as much as anyone, mm-hmm. maybe some do the equal. And he was saying, this is what we must solve. We must solve it. Otherwise, all of my work will have only been to stave off the inevitable. No one has stepped up to do that. And I believe that I agree with him that we have to work on these. The population is, if we don't fix that, everything else just brings us back to where we were before. I can't think of a person who can speak to this stuff better. A lot of people say, Malthus was wrong. Malthus, Borlaug said it pretty well, and Borlaug saw what was happening. And I'm not going to get into limits to growth, but that book is another thing that shines light on that.
Yeah.
So if it's okay with you, I'd like to talk about what I said I would talk about. I think I said I'd talk about role models.
Yes.
And people who have acted in ways. All right, let's say we want to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. Can we do it in time? Is it possible? Has anyone solved the problems that we have on the scale that we have in the time that we have? It's easy to say no, but yeah. I believe that there are a few cases that have given me great hope. I mean, we're already seeing global pandemics and people on the scale of 9 million people dying from pollution alone in a year.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of happiness around, and there's a lot left to lose. I mean, we've still got a lot going for us. Things are going pretty well for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have I talked to you, forget about the recording, but have I talked to you about Edwards Deming, W. Edwards Deming?
Yes, but I don't remember if it was whether it was part of the recorded conversation or not.
I don't think it was in the recorded conversation.
Okay.
I'm just seeing if I'm going to bore you, but I'm not.
Yeah,
so
I think you're okay.
I'm going to give a bit of background, hopefully not too much. I first learned about him in business school. You learn about him in operations class because he figured, well, you'll see why in a minute. But my ears perked up because he had a PhD in physics and then went into the business world. And I thought, that sounds familiar because I got a PhD in physics.
Yeah.
But then I didn't think much of it because I wasn't doing operations. Then I came across him recently. Here's a bit about him. So he left academia, did some work with the government, and learned statistics or applied statistics to a few different areas. He ended up in the census in the mid to late 30s. And the census at the time, they believed that the best way to get the most accuracy, the lowest uncertainty, the lowest error, was to go to every single house in the United States and poll them. Well, the more people you have going out, the more conversations you have, there's a bit of error can show up. He showed that with statistical methods that he developed with his mentors, that you could, if you statistically sampled the population, you could get lower uncertainty at a greatly reduced cost and complexity. So in one of the huge examples of like more than on time and more than under budget, he transformed how the census was done. World War II breaks out. He is brought in to help factories that are switching over from making cars and appliances into tanks and airplanes. As it turns out, okay, before him, the idea was if you want higher quality, then instead of rejecting, things are coming off the assembly line, tanks, say, and some of them are high quality and some are low quality because there's error. If you want high quality, they would, if they want low quality, they'd reject the bottom 10% and let the remaining 90% through. If they want higher quality, they'll drop off the bottom 20% or 30%. So higher quality meant lower output, higher costs, and lower morale because people don't like working and just seeing their stuff scrapped.
Sure.
He applied his statistical methods to the operations, to the process of making these things. By increasing the quality of production, he increased the quality of the output. And he had what everyone thought high quality, low output. He had high quality, high output, lower costs, high morale. What was totally thought impossible, his methods worked. And it's one of these things like radar or cracking the enigma. That was like the scientific thing behind the lines. That was a major factor in, not an overwhelming, but a large factor in winning the war. If that's all he did in life, that would have been just fine. He would have been a great figure in American history. As it turns out, the GIs came back and the people who didn't know the factory stuff came back and they're like, oh, let's go back to what we did before. And he was out.
Right.
Douglas MacArthur brought him to Japan. In Japan, he was originally there to work on the census, but the US is helping Japan rebuild. The Japanese industries, talk about bombed out. Literally bombed out.
Yeah.
And the staff is all gone. So they catch on to what he's done and they say, help us with our industry. Census is fine, do that, but help us with the industry. And he says, well, I'm only going to work with you if I work with top level people. And because he doesn't want to get kicked out again after the war ends or after his effort ends. And they say, okay, yeah. So he works with people at the top levels of industry and government. He says to them, and they go for it full on. And he's bringing systems thinking to, name your Japanese company. And he says, so they go for it full bore. And he says to them, if you do what we're talking about, this is 1950, then the world is going to be following you within 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And within 4 years, the US and other nations are putting protectionist tariffs against Japan because Japan before was known for its low-cost junk.
Mm-hmm.
It would just mass-produce terrible quality stuff. And now they're producing high quality, low cost, high volume, with high morale.
It's amazing.
He was not the only one, but a major force behind Japan's revitalization.
Really?
And Japan, famously insular, famously not like, let's bring in outsiders.
Yeah.
I mean, you know Japan better than I do, but it's not known. Am I correct? It's not known for like, let's bring in Americans to teach us how to change our thing.
Yeah, as much as possible. Yeah, I think they do try to avoid that situation.
So the National Engineering Association, their award that they give out is called the Deming Prize. The emperor, I believe in 1960, awarded him the highest honor that Japan gives to foreigners. And for the next several decades, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Japan dominated the world.
Mm-hmm.
I should say served the world because it totally transformed. Mm-hmm. Deming was not the only character, but one of the major characters. He transformed a nation in 4 years. Now, we were told we got 10 years to turn the world around in terms of that's when we've been crossing all these lines as a world. But some things are going to be irreversible, like the methane in the tundra and so forth. Mm-hmm. So if we don't turn things around in 10 years, we got trouble. Well, Deming did it in 4. We're not done yet with Deming because he comes back to the States after this and he's living out in his, not quite retirement, but old age, teaching at NYU, teaching at Columbia. So more close to me because I teach at NYU and got my several degrees from Columbia.
Wow.
In 1980, I believe, NBC did a show, which is on YouTube, called If Japan Can, Why Can't We? Because America is like losing to Japan in manufacturing and industry and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
For decades, it has been. I mean, the Rust Belt is becoming the Rust Belt at this time.
Absolutely.
In the last episode of the show, towards the end of the show, they show Deming. And he's like this curmudgeonly old guy. At this point, I think he's something like 80 years old. Ooh. And right after that, or maybe even while the show is still on the air, the phone starts ringing. Can you help us? We need help. Mm-hmm. So Deming starts coming in and starting to help American industries, including Ford. Ford was, I think, $3 billion in debt or had $3 billion loss one year. And then soon after that, as not only him, but as a big part of him, in no small part because of him, mm-hmm. the Taurus comes out, becomes the #1 selling car in America. Huh. And, significantly later, but it's not later enough that it's not exactly because of this, lots of other things. But, in 2008, significantly later, Chrysler and GM declared bankruptcy, but Ford didn't. Actually, the CEO of Ford at the time, Alan Mulally, is a Deming guy. Mm-hmm. Deming's not his only influence, but he's a major influence for him. And Deming helped with a lot of other companies too. So he's credited like Xerox and other, major American companies. So he fixes the census, helps win the war, transforms Japan, transforms American industry, and writes a couple of books on it. So I've had a lot of people from the Deming community on my podcast, and I've done stuff with them. And so he is one of my major role models for transforming nations in the time that we have available to us in a way that everybody benefits. Yeah, so I highly recommend reading The New Economics and Out of the Crisis are his big books.
Okay.
And watching videos of his. So
will do. I'm surprised that we don't hear about him a whole lot more.
I know. We heard about like Toyota's TPS and
sure.
When you hear about quality, there's like total quality management, other things that have evolved from him. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the main progenitors. He's up there with like Duran and what's his name? The Peter Drucker. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't particularly photogenic. He wasn't fun. He was just effective.
Right.
So he's one of the big role models. Now, have I talked to you about William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson?
Again, in names, yes, but I have not heard. Just like with Deming's, I've heard you mention him before, but I have not heard the full story. I don't think.
Okay. So now we're putting Deming to the side because this is like an abrupt shift.
Okay.
people know, that I've been, I haven't flown. I'm about to start my 6th year of not flying. It takes me a year to fill a load of garbage, or it's almost 2 years.
Sure.
Picking up garbage every day. People keep saying to me, Josh, like, why are you so extreme? If you don't fly to Paris, you miss out on the Eiffel Tower, but everyone's flying anyway, so it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
And you're not getting takeout. Like, get some takeout. Enjoy yourself. And I tell them, I have in mind, like, after you see Story of Plastic, or this banana movie about when you see whole communities where the pesticides are just like large numbers of people born with birth defects. It's just tragically sad. And I'm thinking of them. I'm acting with them. I'm connected with them through this. So I say this and people are like, yeah, whatever. You're just missing out. Go get some takeout.
Right.
One of my guests told me about this book, Bury the Chains, by Adam Hochschild, who's been a podcast guest of mine, about the abolition movement in the late 18th century, late 1700s, early 1800s in England. I didn't know much about them. And then I learned about them. So Thomas Clarkson was one of the main organizers. Then William Wilberforce, another, he was a member of parliament who proposed year after year legislation against first the slave trade and then the practice of slavery. It's difficult for us today to recognize how powerful the forces. I mean, at the time, slavery had been around forever. They hadn't yet seen, slavery is different from plantations with, like, on the scale. This was when the scale was ramping up like that. Anyway, these guys in England, the largest empire the world had ever seen. And much of England was benefiting from a trade that was among the most profitable trades around. And the story that came to England from what was happening far away across the Atlantic Ocean was, oh, it's better for them. They like it.
Yeah.
It's civilization.
Right.
If they were back in Africa, they'd be, it's cannibals there. And besides, if we don't do it, France will, Spain will, Portugal will. And you can't do anything anyway. All the stuff that people say now, they said then.
Right.
And these guys looked across the ocean and they learned about I cannot put into words the horrors of the slavery that was happening. And I understand that what was happening at the late 1700s in the Caribbean was actually more cruel than what we know about in the United States. And they looked across the oceans and they said, we cannot act as part of the system. We can't continue this. And in fact, each of them said, I must act to make this the most important thing in my life. I will do what I can to end the slave trade. And anyone would have said, you're crazy for all the reasons we said. And I read this and I thought, these people did what I'm doing centuries ago, and they were successful. Some people have described them as the most successful people and the most influential people in all of history. I mean, I've read that there are more slaves alive today than ever before. But it's illegal.
Right.
And we have changed our view that we do not accept it. And a lot of it comes back to them. And so I can't really do justice to the history there. And so I recommend reading Bury the Chains. And if you go online and look up Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, you'll see a lot about them. They transformed a globe, a global practice. So, and in the face of many of the same arguments, I should mention, in 1807, was when England outlawed the trade of slaves. They did it practically. They didn't think they could outlaw all of slavery. So just the trade, which they thought would starve off the practice of slavery, but it didn't. People said, well, the other countries are just going to fill in. We're just going to lose the profits, but the trade is going to continue.
Right.
Actually, the opposite happened. It gave England both the incentive and the credibility to influence the others. And so shortly afterward, Spain, Portugal, France, Sweden, the United States, Holland, they all made the slave trade illegal as well. Which reminds me of, as an aside, if I haven't said this before. In New York City, I forget how long ago, they were going to make, or they did make smoking in bars and restaurants illegal.
Mm-hmm.
People said, if you make it illegal, then the bars in New York are going to lose. People are going to take the PATH train to, did I say this before?
It's a good question.
Well, I'm going to say it again.
Just say it
People
again,
are going to take the
please.
PATH train to New Jersey and go to bars there because they want to smoke when they get drinks. 2 years later, New Jersey had to make smoking in bars illegal because people were coming to Manhattan to get drinks without the smoke.
Right.
This happens all the time. I mean, these are two big examples. I do not believe, and history tells me that if we, let's just put it mildly, or if we act mildly and put some major taxes on fossil fuels, Russia and China will not eat our lunch. They will do it too. We can lead the world. So I highly recommend people learn about Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, read Bury the Chains. These are role models. Oh, and I have to point out another major thing that came out of this.
Yeah.
We generally present to each other, if we don't fix the climate and the environmental problems, more than just climate, we're going to suffer. Right. We present ourselves as on the suffering end of it. But in most of our actual experience, people who are listening to us, Americans, Westerners, we are benefiting from it. Materially speaking, we are flying around the world. We're driving wherever, we're getting food shipped from all over the place. We have all the single-use plastic all over the place. Yes, there's Flint, Michigan, but we're getting nothing like what the stuff that's going on overseas, where the people are dying, where people are getting sprayed with pesticides. We're much more like the British absentee landlords at this time period.
Sure. Yeah.
We are the ones, and the landlords who are supplying the capital and making this happen, as well as the shareholders in the company, as well as the people who are buying the products. People who are buying, at that time it would be sugar, molasses, rum. Later it would be cotton, coffee. We are the ones who are benefiting from it. And so I grew up, my biggest role models growing up would be Gandhi, Mandela, King, Thoreau. Now, in the case of Gandhi, Mandela, and King, they came from the oppressed class, and they were empowering people who are disempowered. They will always be role models for me in character and so forth. But we are not in the underserved class. We are the ones who we are much more like the British landlords. They weren't the ones holding the whips. They were driving the cycle, or the people buying stuff. So it's important for us to have role models. And this has nothing to do with skin color. This is to have role models of people who could have benefited from it and chose not to. Right. Because I'm personally choosing not to fly. I could, and I could just ignore. Well, I can no longer ignore it. And if you look at these at the abolitionists, they have quote after quote of once I saw it, I could not. I had to do it. Right. And also, once I knew it, I could not act as if I didn't know it anymore. So actually, another important character, Equiano, I forget his first name. He wrote the first bestseller slave narrative. And it was important for people the companies that benefited from slavery would say, they like it. We want to keep them happy and healthy so they can keep working. So of course we're going to treat them lies. And Equiano wrote a book that's belied all the lies, told the truth, told what happened.
Right.
And when people read it, they were like, oh, this is not what they were saying. This is totally different. And in America, we have Frederick Douglass is the major one that we know of that told the lie, betrayed, what's the word? My English is failing me, that showed that they were lying and what's actually happening. And we don't have the equivalent, the modern day equivalent of the slave narrative. We have some documentaries, and I think it's very important for us here to get the word here from there. So Story of Plastic was one of the major influences for me of showing
Yeah.
This woman in India, she sends a sample of the air that they're breathing to a British lab, and they say, "Get out of there." And just to see a room full of young children with birth defects. I mean, you've seen the Minamata pictures.
Yes.
Which are, from an art perspective, beautiful, but just gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
And it's the worst. It's as bad as anything as humans have done to each other, on a scale much greater than anything that's ever happened before. I mean, it was just 10 million people in 9 million people in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to equate the products of the system, but I do want to learn from role models of what we can do, right, and recognize that we need role models who are the people who said, I can benefit from this, but I refuse to. Mm-hmm. And then you look at what they write about their lives, and it's, you know, they had their troubles, but they are living a better life not despite giving those things up, but because they're, you know, yes, they're swimming upstream, but that's better for them.
Right.
And that's what's available to all of us. That's leadership to me.
Right. So we kind of have a multi-layered problem there, I guess, in that first, people have to be made aware that there is a problem and accept that there's a problem, but then take the next step after that and try to get people to take the next step after that, which is to actually make the change and to say, no, I refuse to benefit from this.
Yeah, although that's a cycle, because at least in my experience, until I acted, I kind of knew something, but didn't really. Knowing leads to action. Action leads to wanting to know more. Mm-hmm. Until I learned, when I was sitting there saying fusion is going to save the day, efficiency is going to save the day, that's what we need, then systemic change didn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have made these connections. I wouldn't have wanted to learn more. In fact, I wanted to know less because I wanted my solutions to work. Mm-hmm. Now that I realize, once I learned a Norman Borlaug perspective, mm-hmm, then I wanted to learn more. So don't think just because you don't know that much that you shouldn't act, or that you have to learn more before you act.
Right.
Acting will both teach you and will motivate you to learn more. And then as you learn more, you'll act more. So people look at me and often they say, well, I don't know as much as you. I'm not an expert. So when I learn more, then I'll act. That's not how it works. Everyone knows enough everyone knows there's something going off with the environment. Maybe there's something a bit off. Mm-hmm. That's all you need to know to act something. Start with action. The learning will come later. Yes. You already know enough to act. Right. And we'll talk in the third episode of this about how to act effectively, mm-hmm, or how to get started acting. So I guess you could wait till an hour or two until we get into that on the next episode. Right. Because that's how to lead one-on-one is something I've worked a lot on. I think I'm getting pretty good at. Yeah. And although you could tell me better than I could, because you've been on the receiving end of it. I have indeed. Yeah. And I'm really excited to hear that third part also too, because I just want to hear more of, I guess I have that perspective of having been on the receiving end of it, but I would love to hear more about, from your perspective of it, as you're teaching, how effective do you feel like you are being in doing it? And, do you have any criticisms of your own way of doing it, or are you looking to improve certain things? Or I have a lot of questions there. So, but I guess I should probably leave those for our third talk. Yeah. I mean, we could go into it now, but I want to go into my next big role model, if that's okay. Yes, please do. Population has come up many times. Many people won't touch it, mm-hmm, because a lot of people, my first thought was one-child policy equals forced abortions, forced sterilizations, tearing down people's houses if they have two kids, people with power being, abusing that power and having extra kids. And mm-hmm, therefore, I don't want that. Right. People may also think about the incredibly racist, sexist, fascist eugenics experiments, right, that were conducted in our country, in the United States. Mm-hmm. Let's not even Germany. I mean, this is like as horrible as it gets. Yeah. And if that's your thought, as it was for me, if the cure is worse than the disease, I'll take the disease.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for a long time, I wouldn't touch population because there's nothing we can really do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if it's leveling off anyway, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. Now, the numbers, when you look at it, I talked before about spider mites and elk and yeast.
Mm-hmm.
You can also, I didn't talk about the numbers. I talked about the patterns. When you look at the numbers, that's when you see that, oh, I got to go back to Norman Borlaug again.
Oh, please do.
Why do I think we're over? Well, if we do the math, if we do the measurements, we see that humanity right now is over one Earth in its global footprint,
right?
In its ecological footprint.
Especially Americans, right? Like,
if everyone lived like America, we'd be like, I think Americans live with like something like 5 global. Yeah. We'd need 5 Earths if everyone lived like that.
Yeah, I think 4 was the number I saw, but close enough.
And there's some places that are well below 1. I think I'm below 1. I think I'm like a half when I do the online calculator stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If, what is the carrying capacity of the planet? How many people can the planet support sustainably? It depends on how people live and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find most compelling is that all the green revolution that enabled billions of people to live relies essentially on fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
It needs fossil fuels for the fertilizer in order to fix nitrogen. I think for the pesticides. I think the rest of the stuff, even with if you did mechanical industrial strength farming, you could probably do it without fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. But you need fossil fuels for fixing the nitrogen, the Haber-Bosch process. And you can't run that with solar. And it needs fossil fuels input.
Uh-huh.
So if we don't have fossil fuels, using fossil fuels is by definition not sustainable.
Right.
So if we don't have the green revolution, then we got to go back to rotating crops and getting nitrogen from manure and from plants that fix, that's what crop rotation is about.
Sure.
Well, that's to before the Haber-Bosch process, before the green revolution, which is roughly 2 billion people. Now, I would guess that there are other things that green revolution did, like hybridizations and different crops and different crop techniques. So maybe 3 billion. But the numbers that I see, the analyses that I see, say 2 to 3 billion people for the planet.
So we're way over capacity now.
Yeah. Now we can do that. We can physically do that because we have fossil fuels. We can chop down forests faster than they can replenish. We can catch fish faster than they can replenish. So we can be an overshoot. We can be like the elk and the, but it's just inevitably we will run out of, it's probably not that we'll run out of fossil fuels. We'll just pollute the air so much like the yeast that we start dying off. But we'll have other constraints that will lead to problems. That's what it looks like. That's what Norman Borlaug foresaw. And I think he's someone who's looked at this very closely and understands better than anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people say, "Oh, we need more geniuses to solve the problems," which I think they're being disingenuous. But I mean, 2 billion people, 3 billion people—that's a population in the early to mid 20th century.
Uh-huh.
Well, we had Einstein, we had Mozart, we had Shakespeare, we had Lao Tzu, we had Confucius, we had Jesus. Jesus was like a couple 100,000 people, a couple 100 million people at the time. A lot of people look up to him as like pretty intelligent, pretty thoughtful guy.
Uh-huh.
Aristotle, Plato, Newton. So it's not that more people means more geniuses. I think if Einstein were born having a scrounge for food, I don't think he would ever realize his Einsteinness.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not so big on more people means more geniuses. I think you need an environment that can promote that.
Mm-hmm.
So where we left off, if the cure is worse than the disease, stick with the disease. Mm-hmm. Then I learned about Machai Viravidya.
Okay.
Machai Viravidya, I'll give you a little preview. The condom in Thailand is called the Machai, named after him. He is called Mr. Condom sometimes. in the 60s, I believe, late 60s, early 70s, he's got one Thai parent, one Scottish parent. So he's trained in the West as an economist. He's doing some stuff with the government, taking data about how things are going in Thailand. Western education and economics, he's learned growth solves, if you got joblessness, if you got disparities of wealth, if you got lack of distribution, growth, rising tide lifts all boats. And he believed it. So he's going out and looking at the situation. He's like, okay, we got a lot of joblessness. We got a lot of instability. Let's plug growth into the models and see how it improves. And it didn't improve. And he kept looking at it. And finally he said, what if we go down then? What if you have lower population? And things improved. So, you know, here's my little side. In physics, if you have a theory and it predicts something, and then you observe it in nature, and nature does something different than the prediction, in physics, we throw out the model. We throw out the theory. We say nature is right. Economists often tend to say, if there's a theory and people don't react as the theory predicts, they say the people are wrong. So Machai said, well, maybe let's see what happens if we have lower population. And the model said it would work out well. And now what he did, think the opposite of the one-child policy. Think the opposite of all the eugenics stuff. Think of, like, he's not a really colorful guy, but apparently he was sitting with some kids and talking about population stuff. I don't know how, but he starts like blowing up balloons and having like blowing up condoms and having like balloon things with the condoms to make condoms normal.
Right.
And so they create a superhero character, and he starts a restaurant that became a chain called Cabbages and Condoms, which is still going strong.
Really?
Oh yeah. And like, he made sure that everyone, like, you can walk up to any cop or any convenience store clerk or whatever. I forget the details. And if you like, I need a condom, and they're like, here's a condom. And so contraception combined with education on family planning and just use of condoms and things like that. They went from, I think, 7 children per couple to under 2. All peaceful, all voluntary, no coercion whatsoever. All just people wanting fewer kids and getting to do what they wanted to do. Leading to prosperity, stability, and fun sex. I mean, when you think of Thailand, it's like, they're not like sex negative.
Sure.
Actually, it's funny because, not funny, but as it turns out, AIDS came through in the middle of all this. And it's projected, it's estimated that because condoms were so big and like so readily available and so normal, that millions of lives were saved.
Wow.
Of adult lives. So that's not increasing the growth rate, but it's saving lives because condoms are all over the place.
Sure.
So now after I learned about him, I learned about other nations. Costa Rica was down to 17% of the land was forest remaining. And huge population growth. And so they had family planning. A lot of people think that there's this demographic transition that happens, that people think it happens because of a certain level of economic prosperity and a certain level of education. And then the population starts leveling off. And they think, oh, that's going to save the world because it's leveling off. They're not leveling off because of the total population. They're leveling off because of the local culture. So to think that it's leveling off, and that means we're below the level, we're not, we're way above. But this demographic transition about the population lowering does not happen only because of that. In fact, there are many places where it's happened deliberately. So Machai Viravaidi is one example. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Costa Rica was another. They had family planning intentionally, contraception, education on family planning. Other nations, I forget, Costa Rica, Mexico did some stuff, Rwanda, Tunisia, South Korea, deliberate intent, non-coercive. Mexico, they have these telenovelas. They're Mexican soap operas. I don't speak Spanish, so I've never watched any. But they had one where they deliberately made one family have one child and one family have many children, and reflecting society. And the one child family, they're having fun. They have the freedom to do lots of different things. They're never running out of money. Or I don't know. They're like a regular family with one kid, and the other was like a regular family with lots of kids, running out of money, not able to do lots of things. And that had a measurable effect on the birth rate of Mexico. Iran, all sorts of stuff because of the war with Iraq. They like jammed up. I read they reached the theoretical maximum of population growth.
Really?
Because there's a certain number of women that can get pregnant and they can have only so many children. And the leader of the country was pushing for more and more children in order to fight the war. They needed more men to fight at the front. Then the war ended. And some people went to the leader, the Ayatollah, and said, you're going to have a lot of people. It's going to get really serious. It's going to be economically very bad for you. And he took it to heart and pushed for low population growth. And so again, contraception, education all throughout the land. They would send people all over the country to teach people, no matter where they were, how to have smaller families. A later leader of Iran wanted to raise the population, and it was almost impossible because people, once they got a taste of the modern world, we don't need kids like we did on farms.
Sure.
So it's stuck, and people like it. And again, purely voluntary, non-coercive.
Right.
In fact, once you start getting it and you start looking at a lot of places start giving incentives for larger families, tax write-offs or tax breaks for extra kids. So there is coercion to drive population up for people who believe that you need growth, which we know we don't from Hawaii and other examples. But these are other examples as well, modern examples where it's deliberate. And there's all sorts of economics showing that you don't need growth.
Right.
And all these things about too many old people, it turns out when you look at the economics, if you want to find problem with it, you can, but historically it hasn't borne out that way. So Machai Viravaidya, and he, like Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, the Melinda Gates, they gave him like the Gates Award. I think it's like the highest award. And he's done TEDx talks, or at least one. And there's stuff with him and Bill Gates is somewhere online too.
Is he still very active?
He's got to be pretty old now. I think he's still around.
Okay.
And actually, if you're in Japan and you're closer to Thailand, try to get him on your podcast and then ask him if he'll do mine. I read about him in the book Countdown by Alan Weisman. That was my introduction to him. These role models, Deming, the abolition crew in England, and I mean, I can throw in also like William Lloyd Garrison in the United States and abolitionists in the United States, aided by the slave narrative. The enslaved people themselves were not silent in this. Their actions were huge. And so for us who are not in the far off ones, breathing the air and submerged in the plastic, I hope to endeavor to get their voices amplified to us. And then Machai Viravaidya and his peers who did family planning, education, and contraception available throughout the world or throughout their nations. And he made that change in a kind of decade time scale on a national scale. So people who think what one person does doesn't matter they don't know history. Or that's the addiction speaking. You know, they're trying to absolve themselves of responsibility. But great historical figures have done this sort of thing.
It's possible.
Yeah. So these are the huge role models for me. Now I have to go to some other role models.
Okay.
These are much more here and now. Not world changing yet. But as you know, on my podcast, I bring guests on who are influential people. And I walk them through a process that we'll go through in detail on the third episode, on a third conversation, where I don't say, here's one little thing you can do for the environment. Why don't you try it out? I don't say, here's the most important thing. Here's what you should do.
Right.
I start by asking them, what does the environment mean to them? What do they care about? What's inside them? What motivation existed before I was there? Because we all want clean air, clean water, clean land. There's something, we all have experiences with nature. Once that's there, I offer them a way to, at their option, to think of something that they could do to act on that. And then they act on it, on what they want to do for themselves. It will benefit the world, but that's not the point. And in my third TEDx talk, I talk about a lot of people say, oh, these little things will add up. And I'm not going to argue that they won't add up. But when you do it because you care, it's inevitable that you'll keep doing it. And if you keep doing, you talked already last time about the park that's like your park.
Yes.
You have a sense, I read off of you a sense of internal reward.
Yes.
Intrinsic
Absolutely.
motivation. And if you move to a new place, I suspect you will find a new park. And if hopefully it will be clean and you won't be needed. If not, you'll probably clean that park up too.
That's right. Maybe a beach. Maybe it'll be a beach next time.
And you'll do it with this. I see a smile on your face. And so I think you'll do it with a smile.
I hope so. Yeah.
I think you will. I will put money on it. And in fact, you could win that bet by lying and saying, I'm not smiling, I'm unhappy, but you can't, you'll be so happy that you won't be able to say that you're not happy. You'll be like, I could lie and win Josh's money, but I'll have to tell him that I'm happy doing it.
I think you're absolutely right about that. If the experience that I've had up until now says anything.
Now I'm going to give a couple examples of say you don't want to change the whole world. Say you just want to change yourself and maybe the people around you. Let me talk about a couple guests on my podcast.
Okay.
Mark Reed, Colonel Mark Reed of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He's the head of one of the departments there. Mm-hmm. A leader. I mean, West Point is one of the great leadership teaching institutions. Whether you like the military or not, mm-hmm. they're effective at training leaders. Mm-hmm. I met him. I was brought there by a 4-star general to help lead some leadership workshops there. Mm-hmm. That 4-star general retired at the time, now nominated or about to be nominated by Biden to be the Secretary of Defense.
Oh, wow.
General Lloyd Austin III, uh-huh. Who also wrote a blurb for my book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So soon, all this stuff about, I have a long thing about him, about his accomplishments in the military. Mm-hmm. And now I can just replace that, or soon, possibly, if the Senate confirms him, then I'll be able to just write Secretary of Defense.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, he brought me there. I met this guy, Mark Reed, and asked Mark to be on my podcast. So he's on my podcast. I called Mark Reed my one-man wrecking crew because I'll tell you why after I tell the story.
Okay.
So he says, he comes up with his commitment was he was going to decrease his household trash output by 50% for 1 month. Mm-hmm. And he said, I've got to talk to the wife and kids to make sure they're okay with it. He did, and they were okay with it. The month that he agreed to happened to be December 2018. Mm-hmm. Well, that's Christmas. And he didn't think about that. And then they hit, Christmas, that's a lot of wrapping paper and gifts and stuff. That's a lot of garbage. So he sits down with his family and says, hey, we agreed to this. We're going to give it a shot. What are we going to do about all this gift stuff? Together with his family, they say, first thing they come up with is no wrapping paper. And they keep going. Mm-hmm. And then middle steps, but the end result was instead of giving material gifts, they did a, roughly speaking, staycation. So they went nearby and they stayed together as a family at a nice hotel. He said, I spoke to him at the end of the month, and he said, I can't speak for them for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they would all agree. This was our best Christmas ever. No. The material gifts got in the way. It was not despite no gifts. It was because of no gifts, no material gifts.
Right.
A goofy sweater cannot match a hug, spending time together, hearing stories. I call my one-man wrecking crew because I talk to people about what they can do, and there's some excuses that always come out, or the big excuses. Mm-hmm. Family. Josh, it's nice that you produce less garbage, but you don't have kids. If you had kids, you'd know that you can't avoid all that garbage. Mm-hmm. Oh, Josh, for work, I got to do all this stuff for work. Or, I've seen senators, they're like, America's great. We'll always get bigger, right? So this culture. Mm-hmm. No one loves their country more than Colonel Mark Reed loves his country. There may be the equal. And so whatever you say about America, he loves, well, he didn't go big. He went big on love, an expression of love, but he didn't go big, material big. Mm-hmm. His family, I think he's got 3 kids. And actually now I talk to him every Christmas time. Oh, really? And I ask him, well, it's only been 2 since then. So it's 3 now. And his kids are like, where are we going to go this time? We don't want gifts. They love it.
Wow.
Nothing will get in between him teaching the cadets at West Point how to defend this nation. Uh-huh. And he teaches the cadets, it's a very tight community there. So they come over to this house and they learn, this will help you learn to be more act in stewardship. Mm-hmm. He would not let that get in the way of defense of the nation. Mm-hmm. And Christmas in this country is, there may be non-material giving, but there's certainly about material giving.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And he went not material giving, and they had more sense of what the spirit of Christmas. So he just rack them up, knock them down on the objections. He plowed through them all to get closer to his family, defend his nation better, lead more effectively, closer family, more Christmas spirit. No cost, right? It's like, it was just spending more time with the family to help solve the intermediate steps of like, what do we do about gifts? And that led to all this stuff. Available to anyone. You want to save money? That's one way to do it. All right. I'm going to talk about John Lee Dumas.
Okay.
John Lee Dumas is he's an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur on Fire is his podcast, really big podcast. And he's been doing it since the very beginning. And I'd like to mention him because he's actually the shortest podcast, the shortest in time, the conversation. He's like, he only had a little bit of time.
Oh, okay.
And on the first episode with him, I asked him, like, what does the environment mean to you? Or is the environment something you care about? And he goes, at this stage, not really, not something I care about. And at first I was like, well, I got nothing to work with. I can't lead him if there's no emotion inside.
Sure.
But I keep talking to him. And he talks about, he lives near a beach. And when he walks by the beach, he sees a lot of garbage there. And ask him, is there something you could do to act on how you feel about that? He said how I feel. He doesn't like it. Yeah. So he says he commits to, for once a month for a year, he's going to get a bag with him, go to the beach and pick up all the trash he can find.
Okay.
The time from when he said, I don't care, to when he says that and joyfully says it is only a couple minutes. So I recommend if you want to start with any episode on my podcast, like that's a good one to start with, John Lee Dumas.
Okay.
So I asked him 6 months in how it's going. He's, oh, it's great. He's really liking it. And a year into it, his neighbors ask him what's going on. He starts explaining it to them and they like it. And when his family visits, he goes and picks up garbage with his niece together. So he's got the fastest turnaround from don't care. It's not that he didn't care. He knew what was coming. I was going to be like, he knew it was, he actually says to me, should I care? What should I care about? He wants me to get in a debate with him.
Right.
And he knows he's going to win that debate in his own mind. And that's the playing field for him. I didn't go there. I asked him what he cared about. And as it happens, so I have an open invitation. I've learned to sail so I can get off North America without the flying. So at some point I will sail and visit him. And he's in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay.
So I want to sail there sometime and pick up garbage together with him. At the end of it, at the end of the month, one time he was walking along and he sees like some rebar and some construction equipment, not on the beach, just somewhere. And he carries it a mile because it's like, that's not where it belongs. And he liked it. He's not doing it for me. He's doing it in a sense for everyone, but he's also doing it because stewardship feels great. As it happens, talking to him, I'd heard about plogging, which is the Swedish word for picking up garbage when you go jogging. So it's jogging. The pla is pick up something. Anyway, so plogging. So him doing that got me to go try plogging. And as usual, but why I'd heard of plogging. Why hadn't I tried it? Because that analysis paralysis stuff. I'm like, how am I going to get a New York City block with all that garbage? And I kept thinking like, how would I do it? How would I do it? And it kept not starting. And then hearing him picking up garbage off the beach, I was like, I'll just do it. I'll figure it out. So I just go running. Oh, now I'm going to give you a new story. The first time I go plogging, I'm not sure what to pick up, what not to pick up. Here, actually, the rules that I set up for running in New York City, plogging in New York City.
Yeah.
Cigarette butts and smaller, there's too many. I'm not going to pick them up. Things that are wet or absorbent, not going to pick up.
Okay. Because
I'm not going to wear gloves. And if there's no trash can within sight, I pick it up. I don't carry a bag. I just pick it up and put it in the nearest trash can. If there's no trash can within sight, it's at my option to pick stuff up. Because sometimes there's stretches along the river where there's like no trash can. I'm like, I'm carrying this stuff a mile. That's not my option. And if it has to be like, I can see I have a line that I'm going to run. If it's more than a foot or two off that line, it's at my option to pick it up.
Okay.
So that usually means, and so what it's evolved to is normally if I just go running, I would think I prefer to just run straight. That's more fun than zigzagging. But I thought, this is annoying, all this stopping all the time. And then I thought, imagine you paid a running coach and they give you this exercise. We're going to go running, but and then at random times, I'm going to point at you and say, you got to do a bodyweight squat or bodyweight lunge or bodyweight deadlift. That's what this is. It's just running with a periodic bodyweight lunge, bodyweight squat, bodyweight deadlift.
Sure. I'm
sure people would pay for that in another context. So I just enjoy it. I've actually not jogged since the first time I plogged. I've only plogged since. I've only picked up garbage when I run.
Really?
Yeah. And sometimes it's a little annoying, but it's a matter of resetting. And here's the fun little game I have. I want to do it ostentatiously enough for people to see me, but not so much that they think I'm doing it on purpose. Because I want people to say like, well, what are you doing? Oh, I want people to, every now and then someone will thank me. They're like, yeah, thanks for doing that. I haven't had people ask about it, but I've been on TV a couple times for it.
Oh, wow.
For my plogging, because I blog about the plogging, and that's got me invited. Anyway, so John Lee Dumas got me, he's inspired me back. And you've inspired me back. A lot of my guests have inspired me back. That's community forums of people liking to do stuff together. So then I got to talk about Dub Barron.
Yep.
Another guest. He's a leadership guru. He's a author and gives the corporate speaking on leadership. He committed to driving his car, which, by the way, his car is one of the Jaguars that James Bond drove, one of the Daniel Craig movies. So super high end. And he associated with making it because he talks about when he was a kid growing up in some slum somewhere, getting a nice car. There was only a couple of cars that were like, to him, that meant success. So the Jag was one of them. Yeah. So he gets this Jag. And he says, all right, in 1 month, I will drive it no more than 10,000 miles or whatever it was, 1,000 kilometers. I forget what the number was. He's in British Columbia, Vancouver. So it was kilometers. Anyway, he sent me the odometer before and after to show, like he took pictures of it to show that he kept it under. And he said, at one point he was just below the limit. And he had an errand to run, but he knew the errand would be less than, it would keep him under the limit. But he knew if he went riding, it was such a beautiful day. Or for some reason, he knew that if he drove it, he would go over the limit.
Right.
So instead he did, it's a leadership exercise. In my book, I have this exercise about the 3 raisins exercise, where you eat 3 raisins you put everything off to the side, turn off all the electronics, and just focus all 5 senses. How do they taste? How do they smell? What do they feel like? What do they look like? What do they sound like if you drop it? And he did that experiment. Like. Yeah, it's a self-awareness. I got it from John Kabat-Zinn, who's like one of the top mindfulness people. So I recommend looking up John Kabat-Zinn, but that's not environmental stuff.
Sure.
Well, except that mindfulness connects. But so his exercise, he would give his clients an exercise similar, which is eat a meal with all totally focused on that meal. So he said, I'm going to go sit in my car, not drive it, and do that exercise. So he's sitting in the car and it's got smells and there's a stitching and all these details and stuff because it's a very well-engineered machine.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So he got more out of it than I expected. That happens all the time. And he says, Josh, let's have a 3rd episode, because this is the 2nd episode after he's not gone over the limit. Let's do a 3rd episode, Josh. I might sell this thing.
Wow.
Now, he's not selling it because he wants to save the world. He's not saving it because I didn't suggest anything of it. I didn't suggest anything about the car in the first place. He's selling it because he knows with car and without car life. And out of more experience, more knowledge, not less. He's not some ignoramus. He's not some tree-hugging whatever. He's experienced with and he's experienced without. And he's got a wife. There's another car that's like uses less gas, more efficient and so forth. And so I go, okay, all right, we'll schedule a 3rd one. So we scheduled another conversation for, I think it was a year later. And what do you think happened? Did he sell the car?
Oh man. All right. I want to say yes, he sold the car.
He didn't sell it, but he didn't drive it the entire time either. It sat in the garage the entire time.
Okay.
A friend was over and said, let's go for a ride. And he's like, I'm not driving it. And he said, but I guess he must have told him about the sitting in the car thing. And he said, well, can we at least sit in it? So they went to the garage. It's got electronic locks and the battery is dead. So they couldn't even get in the car.
Oh no.
I presume there's a key that will also get them in.
Sure.
But that's what happened. So he didn't drive his car for a year. And maybe by now he's sold it. I'm not sure. And we've got a great friendship. I mean, you can listen to the episodes with me and him, and he's a wonderful guy. We haven't met in person yet. Actually, a lot of these people I have great relationships with because they come back and they say, I'm really glad I did this. I mean, I talked about the Nobel Prize winner, right? He lives down the block. And I just emailed with him because I got all these vegetables from my CSA and I had to eat them and wanted help eating them. And Dawn Riley, the winner of the America's Cup, she just emailed me because someone contacted her who just built, it's this company that built the first modern cargo sailboat. So they bring wine from France to the US. Then they go down they're figuring out what to bring from the US down to the Caribbean. From the Caribbean, they pick up the chocolate and the cocoa and they bring that back and they got some trade going. So anyway, she knows I'm into sailing across the Atlantic. So I just get these calls, it's like when you lead people to share on their values and you support them for their values and they act on it because you connected the value to a task that they came up with. They view me as someone who's improved their life. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I will say from
Lorna Davis, another example.
Yeah.
She was in the C-suite of Danone, and she was one of the major players in Danone USA becoming a B Corp, which was, I believe still is the largest B Corp in the world, $1 billion company. And if people don't know what B Corps are, look them up because that's something that's really, they look like they're really moving in a direction that I think is helping everyone. So she's a major person in the B Corp movement. She's now retired and she just did a TED talk, over 1 million views last I checked, maybe 2 million by now, I'm not sure. And I interviewed her right here. So pre-pandemic.
Nice. Okay.
And yeah, she's had the famous No Packaging Vegan Stew and
very nice.
All sorts of connections. She committed to not buying any clothes, no buying of any clothes, new or used, for a year.
Oh, wow.
And 6 weeks into it, I contacted her. It's like, how's it going? And she's like, that's great. Not only is she not buying new clothes, but she's getting rid of old clothes. Oh. She's actually also, because stuff gets in the way, and a lot of people don't believe this until getting rid of stuff creates freedom. That's been my experience, but it's hard to get rid of it. And then you get rid of it and you're like, oh, that was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
It's like getting off of Facebook.
Yeah.
And then over the course of the year, she keeps sending me all these like executives that she works with who are like also deciding, I don't think any of them decided to go for not buying clothes for a year, but stuff like that. Maybe they go for weeks or months. And these are like high powered people that she's influencing. When you do it based on joy and community and connection, really based on your emotions that are already there, it comes back to you. People love it. It changes you. It changes me. A lot of the stuff that I do that people think is extreme is just me being friends with people on my podcast, inspiring me they inspire me back.
Right.
Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want a community of people who are accomplished, inspiring each other back and forth on things that we care about most?
Absolutely.
So these are the role models that you can become. You, Eugene, are becoming. You've done it with me. You've done the podcast with me. Everyone listening, you change yourself, and then you start with the techniques that we talk about the next time. You start changing others, and you will never say what one person does doesn't matter, because it's leading others. That's the biggest effect. Big things, the more that you do, the more you'll want to do more in terms of stewardship, in terms of caring for others. You're not going to feel like you're missing the Eiffel Tower. You're going to feel like you're connected with people more. And you're going to find things around you that were right there all the time.
Yeah.
You'll share them with people and they'll share them with you. And you'll realize the richness that the reason I say, even if flying didn't pollute, I might still not fly, because you miss out on what's right here, right now, all the time.
Yeah.
I could go on about the role models for my podcast. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give one last group of people from the podcast.
Okay.
Is you and the other hosts of the offshoots of, well, it was original leadership in the environment, This Sustainable Life.
Uh-huh.
Because you guys are becoming leaders in your communities and to make leaders of leaders. And it won't be long before you start training someone to be an offshoot from you.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be, I mean, I see it as like some sort of like CrossFit is the model that I think of, something that's just grown. There's no central governing body. There's an ethos and there's something tying it all together. There's a technique,
right,
that ties it all together. And so this wouldn't be exactly the same, but it would be something like that. Maybe it'd be a bit of like the 12-step stuff, because there's so much addiction going on with people addicted to polluting behavior. Mm-hmm. But this is really feel good, build connection, build community. Mm-hmm. As of now, I started here in New York, in Manhattan. So there's England, Sweden, Italy. You're in Japan. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to count Japan.
Yeah.
We got soon coming up in Myanmar, soon coming up in Chicago, and probably soon coming up in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's listening to this now and wants to bring sustainability leadership to your community so that the people you look up to most in life, they're going to see you as a peer. Mm-hmm. So if that's Nobel Prize winners, if that's Super Bowl winners, if that's Olympic gold medalists, if that's supermodels, that's the people I've had in my life now.
Right.
I kind of like people like that being in my life. The 3-time global managing director of McKinsey.
Sure.
Like that's the pinnacle of business.
Yeah.
Winning the Super Bowl is like the pinnacle of American sports. Winning an Olympic gold medal. Mm-hmm. How many Pulitzer Prize winners? I've had a few of those. The person with the most viewed TED Talk of all time. So whoever's listening to this now, if you're thinking, oh, there's people, I would like to have great people in my life. This supportively leading them to share a value and to act on it, mm-hmm. and to help them bring that to the world. Very few better ways to create a community like that.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. Like, I don't obviously have the experience that you have. I have not had any famous people or any big names on my podcast yet. Well, I haven't actually started the podcast except with you, but I have done the practices. For practice, I did, with my sister and then with a couple of my friends, and walked them through the process and then did the follow-up conversation after. But for all of them, they all enjoyed doing it. And they all started coming back to me with questions. Like, they now message me regularly, like over Christmas, they were messaging me like, Eugene, I've got this, like, I want to talk to you about one of them, Mark. You remember Mark? He came back to me. He was like, I want to have a second talk because I have a lot of electronics and I buy a lot of electronics, and I don't know what kind of effects that has on the environment. Like, how bad is that for the environment, right? And he came back and asked me. And then Eric, the other guy that I had, he also came back to me too over Christmas. And he was like, I'm debating over whether I should be getting a real Christmas tree, or should I be getting a plastic one? Because the plastic one I can use over and over and over again, but I don't know which one's better for the environment. So, like, questions that I had never talked to these guys about environmental things ever. And now they come to me all the time, like, and they're excited. Like, they come back and they start asking me these questions, and they're like, I was talking to my friend the other day about, the plastic bottles and things. And they talk about how they share their experiences with other people. And so it makes me feel really happy too, because to know that I actually encouraged other people to think more about their effects on the environment, and then causing a shock wave or a kind of domino effect that's spreading to other people. So
I'm going to add to that. Yeah, that's what I was going to add. The feeling good, because you were talking about the material, the physical, the measurable stuff you could see. The feeling, I think, is just as important. That's the leadership side. Is not just compliance, but a manager would seek compliance. A leader would seeks and creates inspiration. Mm-hmm. And when people come back, this reminds me of the very first, what got my podcast started. I forget if I mentioned when I first decided to try to adopt the mantle of leadership. After I went the week without food packaging, mm-hmm. And then that grew and I liked it. And I did the no flying and that grew and I liked it. And I thought, why is no one else saying this? Why is everyone making it sound so miserable? My first attempt at leading was to do a series of talks at NYU. Did I tell you about that? Did we record that last time?
I think you did mention it briefly. Not last time, but I think 2 talks ago, maybe you might have mentioned that one.
All right. So maybe the viewers of this one haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Edit it out if it's redundant. So I gave these talks and I put out all these great slides and it's like, here's what you should do and here's why. And it went terrible. Everyone's like, stop telling us what to do. We already know this. Tell other people what to do. Lecturing didn't work.
Right.
And I wanted to give up. And so my former student, then friend, Jay, I was just talking to him about how I pick up garbage unrelated to anything else. And he was like, oh, I pick up one, at the time I was picking up 1 piece a day. He said, I'm going to pick up 10 pieces a day for 30 days. I didn't ask him to. At the end of the 30 days, I asked him how to go. And he said, when I started, I felt weird picking trash up. At the end, I felt weird passing it by without picking it up. Oh, that's interesting. And he said, on top of that, it felt so good. He was enjoying himself, or he was getting so much out of it. He thought, what else can I do? So he looks stuff up and he finds diet is a major thing. So he makes his intake, reduces his intake by half of meat. Mm-hmm. And he lifts. So he said, like, make sure the macros work out. It wasn't just like trivial. Mm. And he really liked that. I was like, that's weird. When I tried to change people, they resisted. And when I didn't try to change, he changed extra.
Right.
And that led me to look at experience. And actually, you gave the perfect illustration of what I'd said, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes ago of that. What was it that you, oh, crap. I mean, what did I said earlier that you did the perfect illustration of?
Which part was it? Was it
that people come back to you? Oh yeah, that acting first, giving people something to act on, or acting leads you to want to learn more. Right. When you talk about them, your friends, you led them to act. Mm-hmm. The acting led them to seek out more information. Mm-hmm. If you hadn't had them act first, they probably would not have wanted that information. And if you told them the same information without them acting first, they would have pushed it away, probably. Instead, they came to you for it. So that's why everyone watching us, act. Watch the 3rd episode, learn the technique, practice the technique with someone in both directions. Have them practice with you, you practice it with them, and act. And I bet you'll find yourself saying, I'm really glad I'm doing this. I want to do it better. How can I find out more information? And then they'll contact you or me or someone. And next thing you know, they'll start a podcast or something like that. And it'll get bigger in their lives. And the next thing, and someone will call them extreme, and they'll do extreme. I'm just, dressing warm in the winter instead of putting on the heat so much, or dressing lighter in the summer instead of putting the air conditioner so much. Right. And people will say, yeah, but you're also doing this and this and this. And you're like, yeah, that's because I like it. And they'll say, well, hopefully they'll say, tell me more.
Yeah. That's the hope.
In any case, you, listener, will feel like, how did I live any other way?
And I think that's probably a good place to wrap this one up on. So in our first talk, we kind of talked a lot about the problems and the values that have led us into the troubles and things that we've had. Today, we got to talk about the historical examples that show it's possible and that there are leaders that can make a difference. And next time, we're going to talk about the solutions and how you can implement them in your own life and how you can lead other people. Is that more or less correct? Did I pretty much nail that?
Yeah, I would say not just possible, but desirable and fun. And, I don't know how to put it, like a better life.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be very happy to live in a world that got Demingified and Machiafied and Wilberforce and Clarksonified. Uh-huh. I think we'd all be glad about that. It's not just possible, but awesome.
Yeah.
Also,
excellent.
Were there any questions? I mean, I did most of the talking, overwhelmingly the talking. Any questions remaining from the first episode or from this episode?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. But I may hit you with some in the end of the third episode there. I'm gonna have to give some more thought because I think that the talk, particularly that first talk, that's a heavy talk, and I probably need more than just a couple of days to process that one. So I might hit you at the end of episode 3 with some more questions. So ask me again at the end of our third chat.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that talk, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you more about the solutions to leadership in the environment. Thanks a lot,
Looking forward
Josh.
to next time.
All right.